When you think of a historic, generational kind of player, oftentimes it can be easy to associate a franchise with them. When you think of the Chicago Bulls, you might think of Michael Jordan. When you think of the Miami Heat, you might think of Dwayne Wade. When you think of the LA Lakers, you might think of Kobe Bryant. And when you think of the Cleveland Cavaliers, there's a good chance that you think of LeBron James, the home state team that drafted him, the team that he brought a ring and had perhaps the greatest individual run that we've ever seen that didn't end in a championship in 2018. But after that 2018 season, he moved on to greener pastures. And ever since that moment, the Cleveland Cavaliers had to hit the reset button, and it's paid its dividends this year, being one of the best teams in the entire NBA. And in doing so, they are breaking the norms of how we so often perceive team construction. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and today we are talking about the reconstruction of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, before we get into the way that this team rebuilt and got to the point where they are today, and how, with the success that they've had, what it means for the modern NBA, let's go back and contextualize the moment when LeBron James decided to leave for the Lakers. Now, the Cavaliers as a franchise do not have a storied history, with their second best player of all time most likely being Mark Price. And that's no disrespect on Mark Price, but LeBron James coming into the NBA draft back in 2003 was seen as the chosen one. And if he was not going to go on to have an all-time great career, without a doubt be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and perhaps be in the greatest of all-time discussion, it would have been a disappointment. And coming from Akron, Ohio, his home state team is the one that gets a chance to draft him with the number one overall pick. And of course, we see it in any sport. When teams play at home, they have an advantage because the fans there are rooting for them. But that can especially extend to a player if this is a place where they grew up. And for Ron James, that was absolutely the case. So there's an even deeper connection. And these Cleveland fans are bought into LeBron James. They want him to bring them success for a franchise that has so often gone without it, to bring this team to the promised land. And in his first tenure in Cleveland, things do not go that way for the Cavaliers. They make it to the finals a few times. LeBron James, of course, has that infamous 2007 finals performance. And a couple years after that, we get the infamous decision in which he decides to go to the Miami Heat. And there he promises not just one, not two, not three, not four. He promises a lot of championships in Miami. And he wins two. But to this point, he was never able to get one for the team that he grew up watching, for the team that believed in him from day one, that drafted him in the first place. So he goes back to Cleveland, gives him that 2016 ring against perhaps the greatest regular season team that we've ever seen. And the way that they do it is even better with that 3-1 comeback. Of course, with this comes the iconic Cleveland, this is for you, which represents just the way that LeBron was feeling in the moment. He really meant every single word of that. This was a franchise that had drafted him 13 years ago, that he felt like he had to leave to have a chance to win and really establish his legacy. But he comes back because he wants to bring his hometown a ring, and he does just that. And it is for Cleveland. And if he had never won a ring there, he would still definitively be the greatest player of all time to step foot in the Cleveland Cavaliers facility. However, that ring was the cherry on top for his legacy in Cleveland. He knew that he had to go back there and give this team a championship. And he did just that. And then the following years, eventually Kyrie Irving goes to Boston. And now this is, to an even greater extent, LeBron's team. And in 2018, particularly in the playoffs, he goes on to have one of the greatest individual performances that we've ever seen. He goes on a tear throughout the playoffs, leading a team that, when you take a look at the roster, had no right being there to the NBA championship. And in that finals, it's not a competitive series, but it's clear the level of player that LeBron James is in the way that he is able to elevate your team to new heights, even when you have no right being there. But with that loss, he kind of sees that too and realizes that he can take this team all the way to the finals. But there's going to need to be some improvements if he wants to go out and win a championship and add a fourth to his resume. And with that, he goes for the storied franchise for the historic team in the uber large market of the Los Angeles Lakers. And with that, Cleveland is without their greatest player of all time and the top two player in NBA history. And for a franchise that, without LeBron James, has not had much success, there's instantly a shift in the way that this team is going to have to operate. They don't have their guy to build around anymore. And if you put together a roster like you did the prior year, you're going to be nowhere near competing for a championship. Their first year post LeBron, they go 19-63. And their leading scorer is a rookie Colin Sexton, along with Kevin Love and Jordan Clarkson. Those are the three top scoring options on your team. Your go-to offensive weapons, and Kevin Love is only getting older by this point. And at this stage in his career, he's not the guy that you want to build around. Then a couple years later, they draft Darius Garland. And his rookie season, he's perceived as the worst player in the entire NBA. But notably, they have patience with him because as a young guard, especially at the point as opposed to a shooting guard, you're going to have the ball in your hands quite a bit, especially for a team like the Cavs that didn't have a lot of options to go to. And as a result of that, you might be inconsistent. You might be inefficient and overall not a winning player your rookie year. And you're going to get criticism for that. But the Cavaliers saw through the vision with Darius Garland. However, they did not see through the vision with Colin Sexton. That backcourt is one that has potential to be fairly solid. You've got two guys who can score the ball at a pretty decent level. However, and this is notable for later, these are two smaller guards in the backcourt who are not great defenders. And they decide to stick with the potential of Darius Garland. Then over the years, you get some more additions like Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, and of course, Donovan Mitchell, which is when we get to where we are today, where the Cavaliers are 40-10, winning 80% of their games to this point. And it was a rocky couple of years for them post LeBron, and rightfully so, as I hope I contextualized earlier on in this. But the last 2 years they've made the playoffs, and this year they're looking to be the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And the way that they are doing it is breaking a lot of the standards in how we perceive modern NBA teams and how they should be constructed. First off, I just talked about Colin Sexton being moved off of in favor of a Darius Garland-led backcourt. Well, guess what? They got another score first, smaller guard to put next to Darius Garland, and it's doing wonders. And that is, of course, Donovan Mitchell, who in 2023 set the record for most points scored by a Cleveland Cavalier in NBA history. Not LeBron, not Mark Price, not even Kevin Love. Donovan Mitchell, a member of this current team for a franchise that has not had a storied history outside of their true generational player. And they look as good as they ever have. Led by a core of two small guards, first off, which so many people, when it comes to constructing a team, they would argue that that is not an ideal way to go. because more than likely, these smaller guards are going to be able to be exposed on the defensive end of the floor. But guess what happens if you get past Garland or if you get past Mitchell? You have to deal with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. And you don't you don't want to deal with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. This team is constructed of two dynamic duos. On the offensive end of the floor, you have Garland and you've got Mitchell. But on defense, you've got Allen and Mobley. Evan Mobley, ever since he came into the NBA just a few years ago, has been one of the best defenders from day one. And Jarrett Allen, in his own right, is a very, very underappreciated center. And typically, when you've got two defensive minded bigs, people are going to point to that and say that's going to be a detriment to your offense. But guess what? You've got Mitchell and Garland over there. So, all four of these players, the core of this team, they're able to play off of one another so well. And Evan Mobley, in his own right, has developed into a 38% three-point shooter as a big man. But you've got two guys to carry the load on offense and two to carry the load on defense. And it's doing wonders. And it really goes against most of the standards of modern NBA team construction. Because so often, as we go through the years, it feels like teams will sacrifice their offense for a great defense, or vice versa. You take a look at the Minnesota Timberwolves and them ultimately siding with Rudy Gobert over Karl-Anthony Towns and shipping him off to New York. At that big man spot, they wanted a defensive identity, and then you've got other guys like Jaden McDaniels, even Anthony Edwards, as well as a Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And this is a heavily defensive-focused team. And when it comes to offense, Anthony Edwards is heavily relied upon. He's taken more threes this year than he ever has before because without Karl-Anthony Towns there, he has to be a major part of the spacing for this team. So they, in a sense, sacrificed their offense for great defense. And another good example of that, you look at the recent most shocking trade in NBA history, where the Dallas Mavericks traded 25-year-old, five-time All-NBA member already, Luka Doncic, to the Lakers for Anthony Davis. And the general manager of that team continues to try to justify it by stating that they want a defensive identity and they would rather build around the defensive-oriented Anthony Davis over Luka Doncic. Because when he was in Dallas, it was a heliocentric offense. It entirely ran through him, and as a result of that, he was gassed when it came to playing on the defensive end of the floor. So he had to construct a roster around him to make up for his flaws on defense. And then on offense, he was asked to do so much to perhaps an unsustainable level in regards to how the general manager views his conditioning and his defense. But in the NBA and in any professional sport, people are going to follow the winners. And you see a lot of teams that might try to choose between an offense or defense. But when it comes to the winners, they've figured out both. The Boston Celtics this most recent year, they are a dynamic, lights-out team from beyond the arc. But they're also loaded with great defenders. Everyone in that starting five is capable of more than holding their own. And you take a look at the Golden State Warriors dynasty. Of course, you have the offensive firepower in a Steph Curry, in a Klay Thompson, in a Kevin Durant when he was there. But you've also got the defensive capabilities of a Klay, of an Andre Iguodala, of a Draymond Green. And teams can be so lost trying to decide what to weigh more, the offense or the defense, when the best teams in the league are the ones that are able to do both at a high level. And we see that with the Cavaliers as well. They've got Mitchell and Garland to handle the offensive load. And then back on defense, it's okay if you get past those guys. If they're a little bit tired, because once you get inside the arc, you got to deal with a Jarrett Allen and an Evan Mobley. And they do not intend on letting you do so. And then another thing with this Cavaliers team is the way that they are so team oriented. I talked about Luka Doncic when I was talking about, the defense offense debate, when really it's both that takes you to the highest level. But this can also be in regards to when your offense can be so reliant on one player that if that player is taken out of the game, if the opposing team has a really good defensive game plan, or maybe that player is missing time due to injury, there's a very good chance that team is going to struggle. But the Cleveland Cavaliers have been very, very team oriented. Now, in years past, of course, Donovan Mitchell had the 70-point game. And ultimately, if there's going to be anyone to go to that you can truly trust to get a bucket on this team, it's number 45. However, on the offensive duo, Darius Garland more than holds his own. He was an all-star caliber player this year. And even with the bigs, who are the anchors of this defense, they are very good offensive players in their own right. And in years prior, there was a little bit of a disconnect between Mobley and Allen on the offensive end of the floor because they were so similar. These were not two guys who were really known for spacing the floor. And as a result, the paint might get clogged a little bit. And so as a result, from beyond the arc, Garland or Mitchell would have to do just a little bit more. However, this year, as I touched upon quite a while ago, Evan Mobley has been a 38% three-point shooter from beyond the arc this year. That's huge, especially for a big man. And that opens up the offense to an entirely different level because teams have to respect Mobley just a little bit more. Now, if you're choosing between the guys in that backcourt or Mobley to leave open for a three, you're choosing Mobley. But you do have to respect his shot just a little bit more. And that opens up more opportunities for Jarrett Allen as well. And it creates a more dynamic offense that doesn't just rely on the guards, but is able to get everyone involved when so often in the modern NBA we can see heliocentric offenses like the Luka Mavs, like the James Harden Rockets, and so on. So yes, you have your go-to guys on defense and on offense, but teams aren't able to exploit your weaknesses either because of the development of Evan Mobley on the offensive end of the floor. That opens up opportunities for everyone else. And on defense, even though he's on the smaller end in terms of height, Donovan Mitchell has a pretty long wingspan, so he's able to contest some shots and get in the way of some guys like you might not expect him to. So we've talked about this team on the court now, and the way that their dynamic together works so well. Whether it's having your duos for offense and your duos for defense, as well as just being more dynamic than ever before and able to utilize these guys in positions that aren't even necessarily their bread and butter. But when it comes to how we got to this point, and perhaps the greatest precedent that this team is going to set, is the patience that it took. Because especially with the rise of social media where fans can freely voice their opinion and look around the league more than ever and see what other teams are doing, people want to see results. And they want to see them fast. It's why head coaches so often have so much turnover. Because teams aren't willing to just wait something out. And even the Cavs fell victim to that in regards to the head coach. But with the roster itself, they were very patient, and they trusted in their plan. You look at the core four of this roster that I've been singing the praises of. It's been the same for years now. And there could absolutely be criticisms that were made. There were criticisms that were made about the fit of this four together, especially in regards to Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. And if Mobley was ever going to be able to develop into the kind of offensive player that spaces the floor just a little bit more to where it's not a detriment to the offense in Jarrett Allen's game. And then with Donovan Mitchell, there were always question marks about when they were going to move on from him and let Darius Garland be the guy in the backcourt. And it seems so often like the media especially just tried to drive a wedge between those two guys in the backcourt when really there was nothing truly there. And the Cavaliers front office knew that. They didn't feel a desire or a need to go out and make huge league-altering trades. They didn't feel a need to make drastic decisions to the detriment of their team. You take a look at the Minnesota Timberwolves when they originally traded for Rudy Gobert. Year one, they didn't make much progress than they had the year without Gobert. But in year two, they got all the way up to the 3 seed. The Dallas Mavericks, back when they had Luka Doncic, the first year, mid-season, when they tried for Kyrie Irving, they go on to miss the playoffs. The next year, they're in the NBA Finals. In the face of so many advocates for moving on, sometimes it's better to just be patient and wait it out and trust in the process if you know what you've got and you believe in it. Because now Evan Mobley has developed into a little bit better of a floor spacer. And Garland and Mitchell are both able to thrive in the backcourt. And Jarrett Allen is still playing very, very consistent ball and is being a vital piece of this team. And you didn't feel the need to move off of any of them because the front office trusted in them all. And so often we just don't see that, especially nowadays. And it's worked out. They've won 80% of their games. They're 40-10. They could very well be the 1 seed in the East. They would definitively be the 1 seed if it wasn't for the Boston Celtics. And they've got a very legitimate shot of winning the NBA Finals this year. And it's through playing more team-oriented basketball, breaking the norms of standard roster construction, as well as just being patient and trusting in their guys. Something that so often we don't see in the NBA nowadays. And for a franchise that, outside of LeBron James, had not experienced much success for so long throughout their history, that was able to mold them and give them identity to be willing to wait for the greater good. To trust the process, believe in what you have, believe in the guys, and give them time to work things out. LeBron's not there now. You didn't have any standard of winning once he left. But in breaking how we perceive NBA roster construction and just the time it takes to allow guys to fully mesh and develop together and grow together, if they go on to win a title this year, as I said earlier, people will remember the winners and people are going to follow this Cavs formula. And in my opinion, that's a healthy league. One that's not worried about making drastic moves. One that waits it out a little bit and believes in what they have. There's nothing wrong with a blockbuster trade now and again, but there's nothing better than seeing a team with a history that is so often intertwined with one player to be able to recover and rebuild after that player leaves and be the best versions of yourselves and become a truly elite team again instead of star chasing as soon as he left or doing all that you could to keep LeBron James there, even if you know that the roster is not going anywhere. To have faith in your players and faith in the time that's going to take them to mesh. It's absolutely paying dividends for the Cavaliers right now, and that's a healthy league. And the reconstruction of the Cleveland Cavaliers has been incredible to watch. And that's all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you for listening.